Hello, I'm Katharina Niemeyer, one of the co-organizers of this conference, and I'm very happy to see you all and to get to know most of you. I saw you by mail, etc. So thanks a lot being here. And in the name of the organizational committee, mainly Selina Vandenbroek and Dominique Trudel, but also all the others I'm gonna name later because it's a long list. So I wish you a very warm welcome to the Université du Québec à Montréal today. Pour la conférence, for the conference, Future of Archives. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the Université du Québec à Montréal is located on unceded indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And I want to thank also our American Sign Language and Langue des Signes Québécoise interpreters today for being here, and also to Sarah Hosaf, who is also a speaker, for organizing this morning opening panel. Please try to speak not too fast, like not as I just did this morning, to facilitate the interpretation and the signing today. Nous avons le grand plaisir d'avoir avec nous ce matin. We have the great pleasure to have with us this morning Christian Agbobli, our University Vice President of Research and Creation and the Dissemination of the Letter, and he would like to address some words to you.
Thank you, Katharina. Bonjour à toutes et à tous, and I'll try to speak in English, but my English is not very good, so be gentle with me. Alors, bonjour à toutes et à tous. L'Université du Québec à Montréal is, as I've said, a French language university, so mixed up French and English. And University of Quebec at Montreal is a dynamic, open, creative university with an international outreach. It's recognized for the originality and quality of its programs, its cutting-edge research solidly grounded in social concerns, and its innovation and the arts. We are also an urban university. As you are here in Montreal for 3 days, I hope more. We have UQAM Central Campus, and you have here its Pierre Dansereau Science Complex. And this Pierre Dansereau Science Complex has a history linked to environmental issues, environmental research. And in this area, you have the liveliest district of Montreal, the Quartier Latin, Latin Quarter, I don't know how to say it in English, and the Quartier des Spectacles, which is the entertainment district. It doesn't, the translation doesn't fit well, but it's how we feel when we are here at UQAM, which is the first university funded in research for general universities, and the 8th in Canada in research funding for comprehensive universities. UQAM has been central to the mission, innovation has been central to the mission of Université du Québec à Montréal, a pioneer in the development of many fields of study not traditionally found in an academic setting. It is unique, and it has unique areas of expertise that have contributed to the institutional identity, notably in feminist studies, social economy, not to mention health and atmospheric science, but also, of course, art, human and social sciences. L'UQAM est une université importante pour le Québec, pour Montréal et pour le monde, parce que nous avons contribué au progrès social et économique de la société québécoise. Un grand sociologue du Québec a régulièrement dit que si l'UQAM n'avait pas existé, il fallait l'inventer parce que l'UQAM, au cours des 50 années de son existence, a contribué à transformer la société québécoise. UQAM has shaped the history of modern Quebec by forming solid partnership with community organizations, governments, economic control, and social actors working together to change society. I'll move fast because I think you have a very tight schedule. I would like to say something about this conference. That's really important for us. And when Katarina asked me to make a speech, I spontaneously agreed because it's a kind of a part of me as a researcher that's here because I'm a scholar from communication studies. And when I have heard about this, I said, okay, that's a good thing to be here today because this conference put into focus the current and urgent transformation of institutional and vernacular archives and collections by highlighting their undiscovered spots, especially in relation to the accessibility and ecological dimensions. How do existing archival institutions, associations, or private collectors and archivists cope with technological and media transformations? What are the current and future challenges for archival research? What kind of new archives can be imagined and created in relation to the transformation of technology and media? A more than passionate program of the 3 upcoming days is rich and provocative, thanks to all of you here today. From Brazil, Mexico, France, Belgium, South Africa, Japan, and other parts of the world. I don't know what are the other parts of the world. Et je voudrais vous remercier pour votre présence aujourd'hui, pour les 3 prochains jours, pour des discussions qui seront très importantes, intensives, provocantes et qui vont allumer l'esprit avec un certain sens critique analytique. La conférence n'est pas entièrement bilingue. Il y aura des sessions en français. And also our organizational committee is plurilingual. So if you want to speak German, yeah, French, English, Spanish, and also Japanese, I guess. So, Katharina Niemeyer, Céline Van den Broek, Dominique Trudel, thank you, and thank you to all members of the organizational and scientific committee. Thanks a lot for your hard work, for your engagement, and I wish to thank also the partners and sponsors of this event, Kirk Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, École des Médias, and the Faculty of Communication, Faculté de Communication, CELAT, so Culture, Arts, Society, Archive, Counter Archive, Routledge, last but not least, the International Association for Media and History. So thank you all for being here.
But not least was to introduce Lien Engelen, who's the president of IAMIST.
Also on behalf of the board of the International Association for Media and History, I would really like to welcome you to this conference on the topic of the future of archives. Au nom du bureau d'IAMIST, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cette conférence sur la future des archives. I'm really happy and joyful to see so many of you here. This conference in Montreal is the 30th conference that we organize as IAMIST. This means the association is already quite old. It was founded in the 1970s at a time when doing media history or using media as historical sources was still a rarity in academia. Some tell me it still is today, but judging from your presence here, I'm quite confident that things are looking good for the field. From the beginning of YAMHIST, it was the idea to bring together scholars, media practitioners, and archivists, because I think we share, or it was already the idea of the founders of our organization, that these different group of people share the same interests and share the same interests. And it's a tradition that we still honor today. So the proposal of the team here at the Université du Québec à Montréal to organize a conference around the topic of the future of archives was met with great enthusiasm by the YAMHIST board. Working with archives and collaborating with archivists is in the very DNA of our association. And almost 50 years after its founding, our association is still vibrant and very much alive. Next to this conference, we have a lot of other things we do. We publish, of course, the Historical Journal of Film, Radio, and Television. We organize a masterclass, which is an annual event for early career scholars. We award several prizes for practitioners as well as for academics. And we also organize the YAMHIST Challenge, which is a prize scheme for early career colleagues who want to organize an event in their institution on the topic of media and history. So you will hear a lot more about all the events that we do in the coming days, and certainly also at the General Assembly meeting that we will be having on the final days of this conference. We have, as an association, a special interest in welcoming newcomers to the field. So graduate students, early career researchers, and practitioners. I really want to welcome you to this event. I know that for some of you, it is perhaps the first time you attend a conference, an international conference, perhaps the first time you present in English or in French for that matter. Please feel welcome and please feel at ease. Everybody will be interested in hearing what you have to say, in hearing you talk about your research and about your projects. So welcome to this community and welcome to the field of media and history. Especially for this group of early career researchers and practitioners, for graduate students, we are hosting a lunch today. So please, I'm looking for Luella. Yeah, Luella Chapman will be in charge of that. Where are we meeting, Luella? I'm sorry, I should have looked it up.
It will be in the main part at the Chaufferie where the registration just took place. There will be the lunch boxes.
Yeah.
And then you can meet and gather around somewhere outside. I guess it's nice weather.
Yeah, it's not to separate the early career colleagues from the more established colleagues, but it is to give you an opportunity to get to know people who are in the same situation as you are and who are perhaps new to this conference or to this type of event. And so you can have a chance to have a chat and to meet each other. And we are sure that this will further discussion and exchange in the next following days. I will not be much longer, but I do want to thank already the team here at UQAM, especially Katharina Niemeyer, who is a YAMHIST board member for a long time. And she's actually the only YAMHIST board member who volunteered to organize a YAMHIST conference twice. Thank you for that. Katharina. For UQAM, for the partners, also for the team here with Selina and Dominique as the core team and all the helpers that are here. We will be thanking you over the next few days. The program looks absolutely splendid. I'm really enthusiastic. I'm looking forward to the next couple of days, which will be days of intellectual exchange, dialogue, and debates. And I am confident that this will happen in the best tradition of YAMHIST, which is a tradition of intellectual generosity and of constructive encouragement. Thank you. I wish you all a very nice conference.
So I'm very happy to announce the opening plenary panel. As you could see, Véronique, you can join me. To the first plenary panel. As you could see, also, there are no keynotes in this conference. We just have plenary panels to bring together like collective thinking and working. And one of the things that are very important for the future of, or the future archives, is the question of accessibility. And you can ask it from different perspectives. So I'm very happy that we have the French and English-speaking community scholars from Montreal working on these questions, but also Michael Malat, who is here, but Vero will introduce them. And I want to introduce Véronique Leduc, who's just on my left side, on your right side, from your point of view. Vero Leduc is an artist, engaged scholar, and professor in communication studies at the University of Quebec in Montreal, where she teaches in the Cultural Action Program, as well as in the Disability and Deafhood Rights and Citizenship Program, which she co-founded. First deaf university professor in Quebec, she got appointed as Canada Research Chair in Cultural Citizenship of Deaf People and Cultural Equity Practices. Her recent work focuses on deaf and disability arts practices in Canada and deaf music. In 2020, she received the Governor General's Medal of Canada for her commendable work in breaking down barriers to social exclusion and enhancing access to university and culture for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And I'm very happy that Véronique will be the chair of this opening plenary session. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you, Katarina, for this warm invitation to chair this panel on archive access and disability. This plenary panel examines the relationship between archives and disability from three perspectives: representation and absence in archives, disability, disabled, sick and deaf people working in archives, and existing archives on disability. 25 years ago, Simi Linton, a disabled US writer, filmmaker, arts consultant, and doctor of psychology, testified to the importance of archiving the struggles of disabled people to claim a common legacy. In their recent work, Grayson Rilmeyer documented of the absence of disability and sickness embodiments within the archival collection, as well as the palpable partiality of the archives. Sami Schalk gives an example in this with the involvement of the Black Panther Party in the 504 sit-in in 1977, a major event in the American disability right movement and the longest occupation of US in the USA history. Barely mentioned, this collaboration is relegated to mere anecdotal participation, hence minimizing the contribution of Black disabled communities in the way disabled narrative are archived. So now I am pleased to welcome with us today our core panelists that will discuss issues of archives, access, and disability. Grace Rilmeyer is a disabled researcher working at the intersection of feminist disability studies and archival studies at McGill University. Sarah Eusach is a PhD candidate in the communication at UQAM here. Her research is focused on the emergence of disability arts in relation to disability activist movement and accessible curating. Mélanie Villette is a professor in the Department of Social and Public Communication at UQAM. Her work examines social media uses, political agency, and social recognition for minorized people and women. And last, Michael Marlett is a disabled film archivist and York University PhD candidate. This dissertation examines disability, chronic illness, and neurodiversity in moving image. So to begin, would you introduce to us your work on archives in 2 or 3 minutes? Please. Let's start with, I don't know who wants to jump in first.
I can start. So, hello, and my name is Michael Marlatt. I go by he, him pronouns. And note, I'll be using identity first language for this section in the panel. So think disabled person over a person with a disability. A, it's how I personally identify, and B, for advocacy purposes. So in the introduction, I'm a trained film archivist with epilepsy, who has worked with collections and institutions, including the Toronto International Film Festival, as well as the Canadian Filmmakers Distribution Center. My work today is less on archives and more so on archivist advocacy as it relates to accessibility in the field, specifically in audiovisual archival education and employment. I've presented at various conferences and have had work published on the need for more disabled voices in the archival film profession. This work really comes from the experiences of my partner and myself, and she's allowed me to share this. I always for disclosure. But she works as an archival manager in New Brunswick, has cystic fibrosis, and is a double lung transplant, celebrating actually 5 years. So we had talked about our experiences, mine with epilepsy and hers with CF, and thought about the accessibility gaps and barriers to entry to employment that we had experienced, and figured we couldn't be the only ones, and we were right. So yeah, I'm currently writing my dissertation on the accessibility of moving image archival education programs in North America from the perspective of students and alumni who are disabled, have a chronic illness, or who are neurodivergent. So last summer, I interviewed 32 students, alumni, and faculty from UCLA, NYU, the L. Jeffrey Selden School for Film Preservation, and TMU, formerly known as Ryerson University. Questions were asked about the admissions process, the campus, their programs, time in the archive, internships, and careers post-graduation. And I also serve on a couple of different archival committees, including the co-founding and co-chair of the Association of Moving Image Archivists Accessibility Committee in 2022, and also host workshops with audiovisual archival institutions that address accessibility barriers. So looking at programming, collection processing, physical and digital accessible spaces, as well as equitable hiring practices. That's me in a nutshell.
They can go. I have slides. I think I overkilled it, but anyway. If ever we can bring the slides. The other professor's laughing. Maybe it's just that we were trained now. I don't know. Anyway, okay, so my name is Mélanie Millette. So I'm a professor in the communication department, the same department as Vero, here at UQAM. And my research expertise is in internet studies, communication studies, and intersectional feminist studies too. And I'm here to share the work we have done with the Canada Research Chair in Media, Disability, and Self-Representation, and more specifically, the development of the first Canadian database on media representation of disability and deafhood. So this is a research project that has bring together a team, and I wish we could see the slides because there's the picture of everyone on the team. But anyway, I'm just continuing. Hopefully the slides will come eventually. So the team of the research chair is Mouloud Boukala, who's the holder of the research chair, Kevin Breton, Jean Orvet, Richard Marcotte, myself, Mélanie Millette, and Mireille Tremblay. And the whole thing is founded on the principle of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the chair's activity bring together people with diverse abilities and focus on developing a reciprocal relationship with collaborators from the academic sector, the community, and the media sphere. So we really work on valuing each person's point of view and expertise to the table, and the whole development of the database was also made possible, by an organization in UQAM called the BIN. So it's BIN, Bureau d'Initiative Numérique. So there's programmers there. And thankfully, one of them, Louis Renaud, was the manager of our database project. And he's a really nice person, and he acted as a translator in a certain way, because while we were developing the database, we followed a four-phase process of creation. So first we had to find the media production. So yeah, we have the slides. So I'm at slides 4. Well, maybe show slides 3 so we can see the faces of all. Yeah, this is the amazing team. So Mouloud, Kevin, Jean, Richard, myself, Benoit, and Mireille. So amazing team. I really wanted you to just see their faces. And today I'm speaking on the behalf of Mouloud and myself. So I'm now at slide number 4. Many thanks. I don't know who's doing the technical magic, but thank you. So it was a four-phase creation process. I'm going to try to be quick, but you can see that at every level of these 4 phases, we had to consult as a team to agree on which media production to include in the database. So we started with Quebec production, film, TV series, and comics, also graphic novel. And it was a real challenge because it's from 1980 to 2020. So it's a very big, time crunch. So we had to find these media production. Then we had to analyze them. So we had to agree as a team on a file, a form to codify both the film, the books, the TV series, and the characters disabled characters, people with deaf hoods, so stuff like that. And we had many long discussion. Maybe we can talk about this in the Q&As at the end if you're interested. Then we had to transport all this information into the future database, the database that is now online and accessible on the website. And then we had to set up a searchable interface, like a website that would be accessible to as many people as possible. And that I had a key role in this, interface building. So I'm really happy to share it today with you and to take this opportunity to learn about, archive and media from a media studies perspective. And just a quick overview of the database today. So next slide, and it's going to be the last slide for question 1. I try to restrict myself. So today the database is online, and it presents data about hundreds of characters, spread about more than 200 productions, and it's a really useful resource because what this database is doing is that it makes visible. It puts numbers on disabled and deaf representation in the media in Quebec. And for the future, we hope to spread to Canadian media production. Thank you.
We can let Reason go.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I first just want to thank the organizers for the invitation to get to speak with you all today and to be in conversation with the other amazing panelists, and for the immense amount of work that goes into making an event like this possible, and for allowing and making possible virtual access. I also want to thank all of you who are wearing masks today and keeping each other safe and prioritizing disabled lives. My name is Grayson. I am an assistant professor at McGill University School of Information Studies, and I'm also the director of the Disability Archives Lab, which is a hub for many collaborative projects on archives by and for disabled people. The lab is fairly new, but it's a place not only to host projects, involve students, and build new collaborations, but also it's a place to do new kinds of outreach and translate our work into new formats. like for social media, and we also have a blog that amplifies disabled perspectives, formats that help make our work more accessible outside of traditional academic media. So half of the research that I do is more historical, where I research the history of natural history museums, and I use archives to think about the erasure of disabled people in history and grapple with telling histories of disability where disabled people might be represented problematically, might be hard to perceive, or might be erased entirely. But the other half, which is much more based in the lab, which I'm going to speak mostly about today, uses conversations with other disabled people to think about how disabled people are impacted by archives in this present moment. So we've talked to disabled archival users about their experiences in archives. We're also in the process of finishing a project about disabled archivists, about their labor and how they navigate the archival profession, accommodations, and the job market. And then we've also just started a project about CRIP futurity and the archival futures that disabled people might imagine. And those conversations will eventually lead to building a post-custodial digital disability archive, all of which I'm happy to talk about, but I will stop there. And thank you.
So I timed myself to be sure that I would be right on time, and I took notes also with me because I can lose my word when I'm in my own language. So you can imagine how it could happen also when it's in another language. So sorry for this lack of fluidity with this setup with my laptop in front of me, but be sure that we prefer things like that. So I'm Sarah Asaf. I'm a PhD student in communication at UQAM, with a background in art history, more specifically in curating in contemporary art field in France. I'm also a disabled researcher, an umbrella term that I like to use to bring both my personal and political experiences as a chronically sick and neurodivergent person with multiple learning difficulties into my academic research and methods. I'm currently conducting a research creation to have a better understanding of context of emergence and subsistence of disabled social movements. These movements which were initially led and organized in the 70s and in the 80s by and for disabled people in the name of acquiring fundamental rights, including the right to live independently. And based on this activist scenes, I'm also interested in the concomitant disability art scenes, this movement which bring together disabled artists and disabled cultural workers who have strategically organized themselves to promote the development and support of practices and aesthetics produced by disabled people on the basis of their personal and political experiences of disability and other intersecting existences, identities, and oppression. So method applies to this research consisted of 3 successive dives into different archives. 1 month spent in DRELM, archives for disability rights and independent living movement at the University of California, Berkeley. And another month at the NDK for National Disability Art Collection and Archives House at Bucks University in Howecombe, Buckinghamshire, near London, UK. And finally, since to my knowledge, there is no physical curated collection like this in Canada, I have contacted Catherine Frazee, a famous Canadian disabled activist and professor, give me access to her personal archive. So these scenes were chosen because historically, along with Australia, which I unfortunately couldn't add to my wish list for reason of feasibility, are considered to be the primary ground of the mediatization of politically engaged artistic movement in the field of disability. And to finish at the same time, I'm curating an exhibition that will open in Montreal next February around the notion of bed life, for which I have invited six artists from different scenes, London, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, San Francisco Bay Area, to present their work. So altogether, this curatorial and archival investigations constitute this full research around disabled activists and artistic histories.
Thank you so much. So the majority of you are disabled researchers. So through your diverse practices and experience of consulting and curating archives or databases, what are the urgent needs and current challenges that we found are the most evident? Maybe we can start with Grissom now. Change the order.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, when thinking about this question, one of the current challenges that I've been sitting with and simmering on is this question of representation. And so I brought with me a few quotes as part of my responses to these questions to show other people's words and really the powerful magic in doing community-based research. So through my own experiences and through conversations with other disabled people, I think representation is really complicated. And I'd like to share one quote and read it at length to help me illustrate this, which is this one, yes. So one interviewee who I spoke to told me about this experience of looking for disability that was sort of enmeshed in something that I think violates the laws of physics. I was in like 6 different places at the same time. You know what I mean? Like it felt like this confluence of emotions, this anger, this fear, this excitement, this beauty, this difficulty, and then this sort of hope. If someone would but understand this piece of paper and this archive and its importance, then maybe I won't have to fight these battles anymore. It felt like everything. And so I share this with you because I think this just so beautifully highlights the complexity of witnessing oneself in history, how quote unquote good or bad representation isn't really straightforward. Another interviewee told me about looking at violent histories and how they could connect with records and identify different moments of disabled resistance, which I think is particularly beautiful too. And they said, particularly with archives, I think it just kind of reminds me that there were disability activists before me doing this work. And I have ancestors and people in the past that I can look to who have done this work and put their bodies on the line. And I think this really speaks to the importance of having those historical records. And it is through all of this complexity that I'm really trying to think about what that looks like to put it into practice, about complexities of representation. So in the lab, we're in the beginning phases of building this digital archive that are based on focus groups with other disabled folks and how we would reimagine archival representation. And this archive hopefully will be an umbrella for different kinds of archival projects that are historical and contemporary. And we're trying to think through what that complexity of representation would look like in practice, what requires intervention, what might require additional information, especially for harmful historical records, where those records tell really important histories of disability, and we can simultaneously cringe and feel harm, but also feel connected to disabled people in the past. And that's a really big part of community-based research that I think is an important part of addressing these kinds of challenges, is sitting with the words of my communities. And I use that word in plural because disability is not a monolith. But the ways that we can sit with the complexities, the contradictions, the different desires, and I think that also makes it difficult to easily summarize and materialize into some kind of platform. But that feels like one urgent need for archives to address harmful histories that do need to be told for people to understand the politics of disability and of deafness and the cultural aspects of our worlds, and ways for us to connect with disabled people in the past, but also figuring out ways to creatively hold historical harms with the care and the nuance that they deserve.
Thank you very much, Gretchen, for those so important remarks. We can go now with Sarah.
So I've noticed two issues that I would like to discuss shortly today. The first one is for sure the broadcast and access to archives, which I think are very limited. And I realized when I was in the archive that archives on the subject of disability resistance are mainly stored within universities and held by academics. So the consultation process isn't always easy for everyone and could be considered far from the community. For example, Berkeley Archives exists since the 90s because when people realized that students and activists who had taken part in initiating the revolution on the campus in the city of Berkeley were disappearing little by little with their narratives and memories because of their sickness or disability, they realized that there was an emergency to collect and archive these memories. And they were students and initiators of the Disabled Student Program, which enabled disabled students to have access to education for sure, but also, and this is maybe even more important, to have an alternative to live outside their parent house, outside specialized institution, and to learn how to manage this independent life by applying and with managing disability allowances and hearing life assistance. So when disabled students were accepted in Berkeley University, they were directly accepted in this program in which in just a few months or maybe in a year, they learned the basis of independent living for being the following year outside the campus in total autonomy. So Berkeley archives are quite early compared to other populations, but have not been exploited or broadcast much since. Some of them are now featured in the documentary Crip Camp, which make them popular today. But if I'm not wrong, before that they were not. They were very little exploited or broadcast. And the other issue is, like Gretchen already said, is really the representation of disabled communities in the archives, because in the end, the archive only tell a part of the history that is sometimes presented as the whole history. And however, there are some early testimonies that I have been able to consult, which clearly teach us that within this mediatized resistance, there was a hierarchy of disabilities. There was also a domination of white activists, cisgender, heterosexual men in wheelchair, who took up the place and the light. And this is mainly their story that we find within this archive. So these archives tell us something really important about disability history, about in an agentive way, but also about oppression. So this is important to become aware of who within the community is not present in these archives, and to start to think of how to highlight these minoritized presences, how to recover more collection of minority community narrative within disability communities. So that was that were the two issues I think about for this question.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It made me think about Nikita Dhawan. She said that absence in archive or in knowledge or talking as much as their presence of something. So thank you very much. Melanie?
Thank you. So I have slides again. I'm pretty visual. Okay, so this what I'm gonna share, it really connects with what Sarah Biro and also Vishen has said. So the development of the database was precisely, so if you could just turn the slide, starts precisely from a need. So we wanted to create a database to contribute to reversing the very slow media presence of people with disability in adulthood, and also to have, you know, an état de la situation about how are these people represented in the media. Because we know that media narratives and imaginaries do feed the way we understand, you know, these identities in everyday life. So it's a good place to start, you know, when you want to contribute to social change. And in this book, so if, you know, the students really like it because it's free online, so you can download it. And the two authors, what they do make is a very strong argument about what doesn't count socially and politically is quite often not counted, literally. So, and it's all about visibility. When you count or you archive or you make stuff visible and accessible, you contribute to augment the possibility of, you know, diverse and inclusive representation and auto-representation, self-representation in terms of different identities. And they show in this book that what is not, you know, valued in terms of citizenship and identities is quite often invisible in many, you know, in research, in archives, in the media, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is make data visible and accessible to make it count and to use it in order to advocate and also to contribute to social change. That was the main thing with the database. Next slide, please. So when we were doing the database, we had to face many epistemological and methodological challenges because we wanted the database to be as inclusive as possible. So it became a real challenge ontologically when we were discussing about how we would name, you know, disability and the different capacity situation, because you want a database to be useful for, let's say, someone who's pretty new to the field, a parent who maybe has only known the medical model or, you know, in the past model of capacity diversity. But we also wanted it to be inclusive in terms of, you know, what's happening right now in terms of activism and stuff like that. So we had many discussions with the team, and the best solution we came up with was to make a fusion, like to mix together the three models, like in terms of terminology. So we would be as inclusive as we could, and the database would be sustainable, you know, on the long term. So we also build it like in terms of coding and programmation, so we could add, you know, new categories, because for sure, as the work is done by researcher, activists, and artists, we will come up with new words to describe the realities, right? So we want the database to be able to evolve. And we applied this to every identity categories. So you have, you know, example here, kind of, you know, we didn't want to reinforce heterosexuality as a norm. We didn't want to reinforce all the dominant, you know, frames with which society works daily. So we did this work and we consulted every time with our team, and also sometimes we had to reach out of the team. So as an example, with gender and sexual orientation identity, we consulted activist groups and researcher groups in this field to be as inclusive as possible. So if you just to show the next slide quickly. So, and in terms of sustainability, our big challenge right now is a training challenge because to feed the database, we have to train students and research assistants and disabled and impaired people on two sides. First, there's like a film and cinema, you know, there's, you know, how do you code like diegetic information related to the movie and the media and the medium. And there's also like what we call an inclusive and accessible training. So we don't want the people working on the database, feeding the database to reproduce their own biases, right? So we also train them in terms of inclusion, disability, accessibility, and that costs a lot of money. It's time consuming, right? So it's a big, big challenge in terms of sustainability for the next phase of the database. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
So, some shared sentiments from the other presenters. I think an urgent need is just having more disabled voices in all roles within the archive. So in the collection and of course with archival researchers, but you know, I'm thinking staff, I'm thinking donors, educators, management, professional organizations, etc. I speak about this specifically in my presentation later in the conference, but I don't think many people realize the influence the archivist has on a collection unless you're specifically working with or in a collection. You know, this has an impact on what gets cataloged and its access. So in our disability representation, it gives us a sense of how we can make our collections more accessible. For example, I attended a conference presentation a couple of years ago where a screen reader was used for a number of finding aids, and it was completely incomprehensible. You couldn't understand anything. So in recent years, there's been certainly more conversation on ideas of archival bias, silence, gaps, and I think that's really where representation matters. A big current challenge is definitely the accessibility of archival education. You know, this can mean a lot of things like accommodations, course content, internships, tuition, job navigation preparation, etc. And some of this might be related to academia more generally, but job preparation is definitely a glaring omission. Student debt from MLIS and MA programs is a huge financial burden, which can lead to stress from immediately trying to find good paying jobs post-graduation to repay those loans. These tuition fees are exorbitant amounts of money, especially in the US. And this is especially an issue from those from various underrepresented communities due to things like wealth disparity. Archival job postings can be quite exclusionary. I'm thinking of things like must be able to lift a certain amount of weight, or, you know, must have great interpersonal skills, or, you know, must have valid driver's license. Like, for example, I can't have a driver's license. So these are sometimes necessary, but mostly are just copied and pasted and don't really speak about the collaborative nature of the profession. Another challenge to that are challenges that come from professional development when you are disabled or have a chronic illness. You know, unfortunately, a number of conferences, workshops, programmings are going back to in-person only. So by doing that, you may have the inability to participate. I know of people who have finally felt like they could participate in conferences and workshops for the first time, and that's being taken away from them. So, I mean, I know I can speak for myself. I mean, I have a severely immunocompromised partner, and traveling for conferences can be tricky. I mean, this is my first in-person conference in nearly 3.5 years.
Thank you very much, Michael. We can go to the last question. You have been asked to prepare something to talk about. Make these archives accessible to communities that are primarily concerned with representation of disability. What could and should be the strategy and policy for accessibility? And I may want to ask to add also the issues of representation, because I think deaf and disabled people don't only want to have access to archive, but want to be represented in those archives. So who wants to go first? I feel that I'm the lotto. Melanie, you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. So yeah. So when we started to build the database, at the same time, we started to build the website of the Canada Research Chair, on which you can find the database and access it. So we can go to slide number 11, por favor. So in the life, pre-academic life that I had, I was a digital media consultant. And one of the things that I did in the early 2000 was to, develop websites with people. So I was like, yeah, this is in my alley. I can take this task in the team, but I was absolutely not prepared to face the lack of guidelines and policies in terms of online accessibility for websites. So when we started to build the website of the research chair, we turned to the audiovisual service at UQAM, and they're really nice. They really want to do a great job, but they had no guidelines, no example, nothing really. So we really tapped on the expertise and experiences of the team in the research chair to build and develop a guideline. So we really did a lot of consultation. And when we had the first, like the wireframes and the first, navigable, usable version of the website, we did trials and we hired people with different capacities to test the website. And then we did adjustment, and then we upgraded the website, we did it again, and then we were able to launch it publicly. But in terms of accessibility, we really had to learn about the diverse standards in terms of font size, contrast, also in terms of language. We know in academia, we do like our jargon, like our very complex and specific language. But when you want to be attractive and useful for, people with diverse capacity, you also have to develop a more simplified language. So on the website, almost all content is accessible in English and French, and also simplified French. There's also audio content, so you can just listen to the content for many of the most, the key pieces of content online. We've considered blind and visually impaired, deaf people, photosensitive, people with learning disability, cognitive limitation, or diverse capacity in terms of cognitive or motor limitations, speech limitation. So, and through all these tests and experiences with these people, the feedback was amazing because they could just share how complicated it was for them to just go online. And I mean, today, the online space is kind of, a big part of, if you're a citizen, if you want to live fully your life, you need to be able to access online content easily. So that's a big gap and a big barrier that was right there in front of us. And so we've developed a guide in French. So eventually, I hope we will be able to translate it in English, but we've learned a lot. And just in terms of also when we came to the translation of all the criteria in terms of the research. So maybe we can just switch to, so this is when you use the database. So there's a simple research and the advanced research. So on the next slide, if you want to show it, it's the advanced research. So for the simple search, you have 14 criteria covering both the production and the characters. And for the advanced search, you have 86 criteria. So, and if you want to use the advanced search, you just have to fill a request and you can access it online. So it's free, it's for everyone. And you can really browse it and just sort the list of all the media representation that have been documented so far. So. And we're still improving the website. So if you use it and you find something that we could do to improve it in terms of accessibility, you can suggest, you can fill a form to suggest something. You can contact the chairholder, and you can also suggest media production that we are not, that have not been covered yet.
Thank you, Melanie. Michael, would you like to go?
Sure. So I can't speak to everything, obviously, in 3 to 4 minutes. But I think about how representation can be included in training, funding, conferences, internships, site visits, archival professional organizations. And again, a lot of this comes from the student and early career professional perspective. It's really a big part of it's about collaboration. I make this joke that, while I'm writing my dissertation, I feel like I could just put the word collaboration followed by 200 pages of exclamation marks, but I don't think that would quite get past. But making sure that programming is accessible and hybrid is an important strategy. One idea is how we create a sense of community and resources in various professional organizations that exist. You know, I know the Society of American Archivists have done a great job of this with their accessibility and disability section. And they not only host meetings, but have documentation about remote work in the archive, as well as guidelines on how to make archives more accessible. There are many professional organizations that directly relate to film, which, you know, include the Association of Moving Image Archivists, the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, and the International Federation of Film Archives. And again, at AMIA, we organized the Accessibility Committee a couple of years ago. It's been a small support network for AV archivists that identify as disabled, neurodivergent, or have a chronic illness. And perhaps there's even opportunities to co-host workshops in partnership with those various committees. I even think about mental health, right? I think institutions need to be aware of the collections and type of material that staff may be working on. You know, again, not to dissuade anyone from working with a particular collection, because you can't speak for what makes a particular student or intern comfortable, but just being transparent about the kind of material that they may encounter. I understand this may not always be possible, but, you know, keeping archival trauma in mind is very important. You know, I've argued before the material does not necessarily need to be explicit to be triggering. So, you know, maybe giving a choice of a couple different types of collections to work with. You know, this allows for accommodation without even having to ask, because honestly, we always have to ask. I just know people who ended up working with difficult material that they weren't expecting. And if possible, perhaps offering a dedicated space where staff can decompress a little bit, especially if material they're working with is triggering. And, you know, I also think about the accessibility of site visits. You know, conversation needs to be had on the accessibility of these tours. You know, I used the example of my partner, and she allowed me to share this with all of you today. She's an archival manager and remembers when her program would host archival site visits. And at the time she was in grad school, her lung functioning was quite low, but she didn't necessarily want people to know that. So she would go on these site visits where those leading the tour would just start by saying, all right, we're just going to start by heading up the stairs to see the collection, without any second thought. So as my wife's chronic illness was not visible, she would uncomfortably force herself up those stairs because she didn't want to make, you know, a fuss, right? So this had not just an impact on her mental health, but her physical health as well. And, you know, this is a scenario that's under discussed. So, you know, if it's an institution that hosts tours, please be aware that invisible disabilities and chronic illness exist. So be proactive. You know, there was one notable tour where the archivist did highlight that it was in their policy for every tour to use the elevator to avoid anyone needing to disclose any issues of mobility. And this made her feel a lot more comfortable, right? So again, as I said in previous questions, it's just the importance of thinking about where there may be barriers in the field.
Thank you, Michael. Those are many issues in NAPE that are present in the society as a whole and not only an issue of archive. Sarah, would you like to go?
Thank you. So 3 points here, and I'm gonna join what my colleagues already said. I think that the notion of accessibility in the archives are really important, and online access specifically. There is already in Berkeley's and How Welcome Archives a willingness to exist online by giving partial access to their archives. For a long time, some of Berkeley's interviews were available online, but I don't think that's still the case since these years, and I don't really know why. But NDK also put some of them of their archives online too, and Catherine Frazee told me that it had been her wish for many years to create an archive with her personal archives and put that online. So that is something that she think about and develop. So I think it's important to get these archives online, to get them out of their boxes, out of their university, to meet the community. And we know how internet have been important for the spread of disability communities. So this is something important. And collection method also is something important, I think, in this question around access to archive. In Berkeley, for example, the collection was carried out by the Berkeley Oral History Center. And this interview were conducted by both disabled and non-disabled people. But what they all had in common is that they all had been involved in the first movement. They were first witnesses to this event. They were workers in Berkeley, friends of activists in Berkeley, life assistants. And they questioned the memory of Berkeley first activists, mixing their respective memories to try to restore as faithfully as possible, as political as possible, the way in which history, disability history were made. So this tells us something interesting about how to think not only about accessibility to archives, but about accessibility to narratives by and for people, also first concerned and allies. And to finish, I would like to add that accessibility is also an issue within the archive in terms of how disabled people or sick people can consult, who can't consult the archives. In my experience, even if in generally the archives are fairly accessible, I sometimes had difficulties carrying boxes down from one floor to another because of the weight of the boxes, because of the stairs, and struggle with the classification, which was sometimes difficult to understand and to follow for me. So when you live far away from the archive you are interested in, you need to be able to travel, to move, to manipulate and consult and read quickly all the materials that you think are going to be important for your research. So that's why I've decided to spend a month in each, because I am slow, I have pain, but it was also a privilege to have the opportunity to dedicate all my time for this, for a whole month in this archive. So this can also create an exhaustion, specifically when you experience chronic pain and fatigue, and when you have learning issues. This could be a barrier to access to archives, to connect with the legacy. And you are often on your own. So it's really a sporty activity, actually, when you are disabled to consult some archives. So we have to think about how and when we give access to archives. So that was my conclusion.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Gretchen?
Yeah, I will just echo a lot of what has already been said. I often discourage thinking of access as a checklist because access isn't always straightforward. It often is, as was just pointed out. It's relational, it's continually co-created, and it's different for everyone, and that changes over time as well. I guess the thing I will add to what has already been said is just to place emphasis about the time that access takes. That often gets placed on disabled people, the time it takes to make requests, to explain one's needs, to go through the proper bureaucratic channels, to wait for responses, to send 1 million follow-up emails, to wait for technology, for captioners, for interpreters who are only paid for certain portions of time, to wait for construction, and then having to often structure your day around things like, I've waited so many times for transport vans and adhered to their schedule, which might be different than how you want to plan your day. And that is not even taking into consideration being turned down, being told, no, we don't provide that, or no, that's too expensive, or no, it's just not accessible. And so I also want to point out the subtleties, building on what Sarah was saying too, the subtleties of the feelings of accessibility and how that shapes disabled people's feelings of belonging, even when there are accommodations processes, or even when spaces are or can be made accessible. So in one project, I interviewed folks about their experiences with representation, but in every single interview, accessibility came up. And one person I talked to really beautifully summarized this experience of the archivists and the people in charge of special collections and so forth were extremely helpful once I made it known that I might need help accessing certain materials. But I guess it did sort of bring me to an even deeper awareness of what it means to be a disabled researcher in a physical space that doesn't necessarily exclude a disabled body in overt ways, but wasn't necessarily designed with that experience in mind. And this quote is published in a full article on Access that I use those interviews for. And these stories really show how even when spaces are accessible or when people are willing to help increase accessibility, the subtleties of this sort of effort and labor and time that it takes that gets placed on disabled people to request, to explain, to advocate for their own access needs really can also produce a sense of alienation, or this, as this participant said, this awareness of oneself not belonging in a space. And so I guess since I'm the last to go, I will just conclude by saying that, like, to come back to my original sentence of how access is relational and co-created, access doesn't need to be only bureaucratic and only understood as a way to create like bare minimum ways for disabled people to access spaces. Like, access can be creative, accessibility can be beautiful. A friend of mine, Louise Hickman, recently reminded me that ramps don't need to be bare bones that quote unquote detract from the aesthetics of a building. You know, they can be beautiful, they can add aesthetic and functional value. And likewise, for any disabled people here who've had the pleasure of being in disability spaces where access is co-created and complicated, and just getting the sheer pleasure of witnessing spaces where people can stim and move and make noise. Interpreters are part of communities, spaces are fragrance-free, masks are required, and everyone is sort of sharing in this like labor, as Mia Mingus, Alice Wong, and Sandy Ho have told us, that access is love. Like, access can just be such a beautiful form of care and presence with community. And I would really love to see that more in archival spaces, so we can just have more ease and more pleasure when accessing our own histories. So thank you.
So much, Grayson, Michael, Melanie, and Sarah, for raising so important topics relating to disability, access, and archive. We have some time for questions, if we have some. Not everybody at the same time, please. Yes.
Thanks for the break. My question is for Melanie about the database. I'm curious as to how this intersects with like the screen industry in Quebec and in English Canada, because I mean, there's a lot of work done with other marginalized communities to get like more queer people or Black representatives working behind this. So I'm curious as to how you see this going forward and encouraging.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you please repeat, because interpreter have some difficulty sometimes. Can you speak louder, please?
Yeah, I'm trying to speak louder. It's hard to hear back here too, so. The question is about how the database intersects with screen industries and other marginalized communities, like Black communities, queer communities. A lot of us are doing work to get more from marginalized communities working behind it. And so I'm curious as to how the database is you're planning on normalizing moving forward and getting more people with disabilities working behind the scenes behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for
repeat the question. I think for Grayson that it was not easy to. So Melanie, can you resume the question before answering?
Yeah, sure. So the question is about how does the work with the database resonate with the industry, the media industry, because there's an awareness and there's been work done for the last at least 15 years, I could say, in terms of inclusion for other marginalized and minority groups. Perfect. Thank you. So that's a great question. Thank you. So there's really a momentum right now, I think, and the media industry is really open and wants to learn. But so this is it streamed online? Is it public stuff that I'm? No, yes, no, don't tweet about it. So from what I see, so as an example, many associations like the Directors Association in Quebec, CBC, Radio Canada, they have invited us to present the database, but mostly to offer formation, education about what is representation, what is a fair representation, what is diverse representation, and strategies to walk toward a more inclusive and representative way to depict disabled people. And one of the main recommendations from the research and the activist work is to include disabled people within, like, at the scenario level, and there's a bit of friction at this level because writers, they work alone or two people or a small team, and then when the project is financed, then they move forward, and then they might add like revision for gender roles, for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like it's done afterwards. It's done. So the way it's structured. So I'm not saying that there is no openness and that the work is not done. It's just that there's a massive move that needs to be done in terms of, do we really want to achieve that? You can always tell when a disabled character has been patched afterwards, or if they realized afterwards that oh my God, like there's no women talking with each other in the movie, or there's only heterosexual couples, stuff like that. So yeah, so it's happening slowly. And one of the key recommendations is to include people with diverse background and identities at the idea level, at the scenarization level. So this is the real way to move it forward. The other strong recommendation, in which I believe firmly, is to include people themselves within the production team, at all steps of the way, from the pre-production to the production to the post-production. So people concerned, like actors, of course, but also behind the screen.
Thank you, Michael.
I just wanted to follow up with that. I'm not sure who might be aware, but the Disabled Screen Office was founded this year, beginning of 2023. I'm a little bit involved with some of that, and there's plans for. I think they're at the research stage now, but there's plans to put together like a guidelines for more of an accessible screen industry within Canada, both in front of the screen and behind the screen. They just hired their new executive director like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So the Disability Screen Office is definitely a great initiative there.
Thank you very much. Other question? Yes, please.
Yes, I have a question. Are there any initiatives to further accessibility in less privileged parts of the world? I'm speaking, well, I'm from Europe, and I'm from Belgium in Europe, which is not the less privileged part, obviously, but I'm really impressed by all of your the knowledge that is gathered in this room about accessibility. And looking at archives, even where I'm from, I see there is very little knowledge about it, very little sensitivity even for this. So I wonder if there are any like larger umbrella initiatives in these fields that others can like step into or benefit from to help their associations and their organizations locally.
Thank you for your question. Grayson, would you like to answer the question?
I can't think of any like organizations off the top of my head, but I would say over the past maybe 15 years, the field of disability studies has really been critical of its Western positionality, or predominantly Western positionality, and there's a lot more work being done in different parts of the world, and especially in the global South. And I would point you to the work of Jasbir Puar, who talks about disability, disablement, and debility as it happens in different places in the world as a production of war, where not only are people disabled, but infrastructure is disabled, and sort of these assemblages of impacts on disabled people that are really place and space specific.
Thank you. Farah, would you like to add something?
I don't know. Okay, no.
Maybe later. Yes, please.
Yes, hi. I'm Lance Watsky. I'm a professional film archivist for the past 30 years. I am also the chair for the Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers, SMPTE, which is the leading organization for standards for broadcast production. As we talk, one of the things that starts to resonate is when we look at captioning and we look at the challenge of accuracy of words in captioning. I'm from the States. I would think the same problem is here as worldwide, really. It's you get into a challenge of provincial wording, so that dialects and provenance of wording sometimes is a problem for captioning. One of my clients is University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, very southern talking. I would believe, and I don't know if this is really happening, because so what happens is that you get the archivist, you get the engineers, right? And it's two totally different worlds, right? Same thing with footage research, right? It's like they're their own group of scholars. What we have to do, and there's a portal to do this, is to fuse archival improvement of technology with those which are the manufacturers of the technology, which actually come under engineering, so Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers, SMPTE. They would be the organization, and I actually am the person that is the chair of the Lifetime Achievement Award for people that are involved in improvements of archival technology, the SMPTE. Right? It's last year we had Barbara Flukiga. She's like specialized in color theory, right? This year, this year it hasn't been officially announced, so I can't go public with it. But I think what I start to see is the challenge of recognizing that when we're dealing with media and broadcasting, that it's really two different worlds. And those worlds don't really align too well, right? Until there's effort, until there's an awareness of, hey, you guys are the ones that are creating the standards, worldwide standards of how broadcast media works. Let's create a subgroup of archivists involved in captioning and begin the discussion with those who, because the archivists aren't the engineers. They're not going to be the ones that are going to improve technology. But there are portals through like Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers and International Federation of Film Archives to begin this dialogue. I think it becomes really important. So just wanted to share that and open to any further discourse on this, because I'm very connected to both ends of the spectrum.
Thank you, Grayson. I don't know if you got all the information, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think between the ASL interpreter and partial.
Perfect. So about the accuracy of subtitling, yeah, and sometimes they are working from a dubbing version, so from other versions. So if we are listening to a film in a foreign language, then the hearing person with me will hear something and the subtitle will be really different, because there's no cross or double verification of the subtitling. Thank you for this remark. Yeah, maybe we have time for a last question. Now or never. Okay, so thank you very much, Grayson, Michael, Melanie and Sarah for raising those so important issues. I think for me, ORCA, when you talk, Gretchen, about the feeling of belonging, so it's not only documenting our history, but really creating a sense of belonging to society, but also for in between deaf and disabled communities, because we often put minoritized community as we are a group, but about social categorization, we don't necessarily know each other. So I don't know much about the blind history as a deaf person, or disabled people don't know much about deaf histories and so on. And also the importance of intersectionality, and how I've met with a young deaf indigenous woman, and she was raising the issues of similarities between the residential house for deaf people and for indigenous people. And so as a deaf indigenous woman, she wanted to raise the intersection of those histories. So thank you very much for your presence and your remark today. And thank you for you being here. I wish you a wonderful practice.